In the autumn of 1326, in the city of London, a man named Richard the Raker was working above his own cesspit when the wooden boards beneath his feet rotted through and gave way. He dropped straight down into the pit below, into the accumulated waste of his entire household, and there, unable to climb back out of the filth, he drowned. The clerk who recorded his death wrote, quite plainly, that he drowned monstrously in his own excrement. Whatever you believe your worst moment in a bathroom has ever been, it is not this. It will never come close to the final minutes of Richard the Raker. And here is what makes it stranger still. Richard was no fool who wandered somewhere he should not have gone. He cleaned filth for a living. He knew better than anyone alive what waited under those boards. So keep him in the back of your mind, because before we are finished I am going to take you down into a pit exactly like that one, with the men who climbed into them on purpose, night after night by choice. I am going to show you why those men were paid as well as skilled craftsmen, why they were half feared by the very neighbours they served, and why almost none of them ever spoke a word about what they did. Hold that thought. First, you need to understand the world that made such a job necessary, so let me set you down in it. It is a cold, half-lit morning somewhere around the year 1300, in the reign of the early King Edwards, and you are waking not in a city but in a village in the English countryside. Your house is small and timber-framed, its walls packed with mud and dung and straw, its floor beaten earth strewn with old rushes. There is no bright bathroom waiting for you down a warm hallway. There is no hallway. There is no running water, no pipe, no drain. Nothing that a modern person would recognize as plumbing at all. The Romans, who once built bathhouses and sewers across this island, left these shores centuries ago, and their aqueducts and drains have long since crumbled into moss-covered ruins that nobody remembers how to use. You are entirely on your own. And yet the very ordinary problem you are about to solve, the same problem every human being who has ever lived has faced every single day, was one these people handled with far more thought and far more law than you would ever guess. So what do you actually do? For most villagers, the answer waits a short walk from the door. Out in the yard, behind the house, stands a small wooden shed, or sometimes just a screened plank set over a hole dug into the ground. This is the cesspit, and it is the beating heart of medieval sanitation, a simple pit sunk into the earth where the household's waste collects and slowly seeps away into the soil. In the freezing dark of a winter night, though, no one wants that walk, so beside the bed sits a chamber pot, a plain vessel of fired clay or, in a better-off house, of pewter, filled quietly through the night and carried out and emptied in the morning. And when the moment comes and you reach for something to clean yourself, there is one thing you will not find anywhere in this world because it has not been invented. There is no toilet paper. It will not exist in Europe for centuries yet. Instead, your hand finds whatever the land and the season provide. A handful of soft moss, a twist of hay or straw, a bunch of leaves, a rag of worn linen, rinsed out and used again. The wealthy might allow themselves a scrap of soft wool. Everyone else made do with what grew nearby and thought nothing of it because they had never known anything else. And out here, almost nothing was truly wasted. In the countryside, the contents of the cesspit and the muck of the yard were not simply a problem to be hidden away. They were a resource, spread across the fields. Human and animal waste alike fed the soil and swelled the next harvest, and a careful farmer valued his dung heap almost as much as his grain store. The rhythm of it was old and unbroken. What the body released, the land quietly took back, and the land gave bread in return. Out here, among a few dozen souls and open fields stretching away to the horizon, waste could always find somewhere to go. It could be buried, spread, or soaked away into ground there was plenty of. That is the countryside. That is the easy version of this story. But everything I have shown you so far was the village. Now let me take you into the city of 80,000 people, with no sewers at all. This is London, around the year 1300, the largest city in England by a vast margin. Tens of thousands of human beings packed together behind timber walls, along narrow, twisting lanes that barely ever see the sun. Every one of those people eats. Every one of them, therefore, produces waste, every single day, and there is no river of hidden pipes beneath the streets to carry any of it away. There is only the same pit in the ground you knew back in the village, except now there are thousands of them, dug side by side, under and behind houses that lean together over crowded alleys. And when you crowd that much life into that little space, the simple country problem becomes something else entirely. It becomes a matter for the law, because the city did not simply let this happen. And this is the first thing that will surprise you if what you had pictured was a lawless swamp of filth. London had building regulations about exactly this, and they were old. Under an ordinance that reached back into the 12th century and the city's very first mayor, a man named Henry Fitz-Ailwin, there were firm rules for how a cesspit had to be built. A pit lined properly with stone had to sit at least 2.5 feet back from your neighbour's land. A pit that was merely dug into bare earth, where the seepage would spread further, had to sit further still, a full 3.5 feet away. Sit with what that actually means. Someone, centuries ago, worked out a minimum legal distance between your toilet and the property next door, and wrote it into the law of the city and enforced it. This is not the behaviour of people wallowing happily in their own mess. This is the behaviour of people fighting, constantly and with real effort, to keep the mess under some kind of control. And when the rules were broken, people took each other to court over it. The city kept careful records of these disputes, the assize of nuisance, and they read like a very old and very familiar kind of neighbourly war. One man complains that the filth from the privy next door is soaking through the party wall into his own cellar. Another says his neighbour's cesspit overflows and floods his yard whenever it rains. A landlord is ordered to repair a broken drain that is fouling the house below. Case after case, year after year, ordinary Londoners dragging one another before the authorities because someone's waste had crossed a line it was never meant to cross. You do not fill the courts with complaints about filth if filth is a thing that nobody minds. These were people who minded a great deal. Higher up the ladder, the arrangements grew more ingenious. In the great stone castles and the halls of the rich, you would find a garderobe, a small chamber built into the very thickness of the wall, with a stone seat and a shaft that dropped straight down the outside of the building, emptying into the moat, or into a deep pit, or simply out onto the slope below. That word itself, garderobe, means to guard your robes, because people hung their clothes in these little rooms, believing the sharp ammonia in the air kept the moths out of the wool. In the crowded heart of the city, meanwhile, the answer was to build out over water. Public latrines were raised on the bridges and along the wharves, rows of wooden seats perched directly above the Thames, so that the river itself would carry everything away on the falling tide. London Bridge, that famous crowded span lined with houses and shops, carried public privies that discharged straight into the water rushing between its stone arches. It was, in its way, a public service, a place any passerby could use, built deliberately by a city that understood perfectly well that all these people needed somewhere to go, and the city paid people real wages to keep the whole thing moving. There were officials whose entire job was the cleanliness of the streets, the surveyors of the pavement, and gangs of workers called rakers, who went through the lanes with carts hauling away the muck, the animal dung, the rubbish and the waste that gathered in the open gutters running down the middle of the road. There were laws against throwing waste into the streets and the watercourses, and there were fines, real money, for anyone caught doing it. Butchers were ordered to carry their offal well outside the walls. Every citizen was made responsible for keeping the stretch of street in front of his own door. None of it was ever perfect, and the city still stank, especially in high summer, in a way that would knock you flat off your feet today. But the picture of a medieval London where nobody cared and nobody so much as tried is simply false. People cared, the authorities pushed, and the effort never once stopped. And there is one more piece of this you would never expect. The piece that turns the whole idea of waste completely on its head. Some of it was worth good money. Urine in particular was a genuine industrial raw material, collected, saved and sold. The fullers, the tradesmen who finished woolen cloth, trod that cloth for hours with their bare feet in vats of stale urine, because the ammonia in it stripped away the natural grease and left the wool clean, soft and ready to take a dye. The tanners, who turned raw hides into leather, used it too, along with other foul and pungent matter, in the long and stinking business of curing skin. So while you were emptying your chamber pot each morning, thinking only of being rid of the stuff, that very same pot in another quarter of the city was being carefully gathered up by men who paid for the privilege, because to them it was not filth at all. It was the beginning of a shirt or a pair of boots. Now stop for a moment and think about your own morning. You woke up, and at some point in the first hour of your day you walked into a bright, clean room, and used water you did not have to carry, and everything you left behind simply vanished, swept away down a pipe into a hidden network you have never seen and never think about. You have almost certainly never once wondered where it truly goes. That forgetting, that total invisibility, is one of the quiet miracles of the modern world, and it is barely more than a century old. The medieval person had no such luxury. Their waste did not vanish. It sat a few feet away in a pit in the ground, filling slowly, week by week, month by month, an unavoidable physical fact of the household that everyone could smell and everyone knew was there. And here is the question I would genuinely love you to sit with for a second. That pit, unlike your pipe, did not empty itself. Sooner or later it filled to the very top, and something had to be done about it. And someone, a real living human being, had to climb down into it and take out by hand what an entire household had spent months putting in. So who on earth did that? And why, of all the strange facts in this story, was it one of the best paid jobs a common man could find in the whole medieval city? These, at last, are the men I promised you at the very beginning. They were called gong farmers, and the name itself tells the whole story. Gong was an old and blunt English word for a privy, and to farm it was to harvest what it held. They were also called nightmen, and that second name matters, because by law they were only ever permitted to work after dark, when the streets were empty and the city was asleep. Under cover of night, by the light of a single lantern, a gong farmer and his small crew would open up a household cesspit, climb down into it, and dig out its contents by the bucketful, loading the waste into carts to be hauled outside the city walls and dumped in the official lay stalls, or sold on as fertilizer to the farms beyond. It was staggeringly unpleasant, and it was genuinely dangerous. The trapped air in a deep, sealed pit could suffocate a man where he stood, or catch fire from his own flame, and the risk of doing precisely what Richard the Raker did, of falling in and drowning, was there every single night. And it was exactly because the work was so vile and so risky, and because someone absolutely had to do it, that the gong farmer was paid extraordinarily well. Where a common labourer might earn a few pennies for a long day's hard work, a gong farmer could earn many times that for a single night down in the dark, enough that some of them grew genuinely comfortable, even prosperous, on the strength of the one job that no one else in the city would go anywhere near. But the money came with a price that was never counted in coin. The gong farmer carried the smell of the work home with him, and it did not scrub off easily, so he lived apart, often in his own quarter out at the edge of things, kept firmly at arm's length by the very neighbours whose houses he alone kept livable. He worked in the dark, he was paid in the dark, and he learnt to keep the details of his trade to himself, because who, sitting down to their supper, wants to hear about it? That is the quiet truth underneath the whole system. This city of 80,000 souls, with its bridges and its laws and its fine woolen cloth, stayed livable at all only because a small number of well-paid, half-shunned men climbed down into the dark every night, hauled its worst realities away, and then said nothing about it. Richard the Raker was one of theirs. He knew the danger better than anyone. It took him anyway. Which brings us, finally, to the biggest myth of them all, the one you have very likely carried into this story without even noticing you were holding it. The image of the medieval city as one bottomless open sewer, where every upstairs window flew open and a bucket of filth came sailing down onto the head of anyone unlucky enough to be walking below, where nobody washed and nobody cared, and the streets ran ankle-deep in muck without a single soul lifting a finger. It makes for a wonderful, disgusting picture. It is also, in the main, simply not true. Even the famous warning cry that people always imagine, the shout that supposedly came just before the slops came down, actually belongs to later centuries and to other cities, not to the London of 1300. Yes, waste was sometimes thrown out where it should not have been, and yes, this was a far filthier world than our own by a very wide margin, but we have now seen the entire other half of it. We have seen the building codes setting the legal distance of a cesspit from the wall next door. We have seen the courts crowded with citizens suing over a neighbour's overflowing privy. We have seen the paid rakers and the surveyors of the pavement, the fines for fouling the street, the public latrines built out over the river, and the whole hidden profession of the gong farmers. Emptying your chamber pot out of a window and onto the street was not the ordinary way of things at all. It was an offence, and if you were caught at it, you were fined by a city that was trying, imperfectly but relentlessly, to keep itself clean. So strip away the cartoon and what is left standing is something far more human and far more surprising than the legend ever allowed. Not a filthy people wallowing without a thought, but ordinary men and women grappling every single day with a problem that never went away and never could, and grappling with it through law and labour and no small amount of ingenuity in a world that had none of the tools you reach for without thinking. They dug their pits and measured their distances. They passed their ordinances and dragged their neighbours to court. They paid strange, shadowed men a small fortune to carry the worst of it away in the dark. They saved their urine to soften their cloth and cure their leather, and they did all of it without a single pipe, a single drain, or a single sheet of paper. So the next time everything you leave behind simply disappears down a pipe you never once think about, remember Richard the Raker and the pit that swallowed him, and the whole quiet, forgotten, hard-won machinery that a medieval city built with its bare hands, just to manage the one thing every human being who has ever lived has always had in common: